I'm Megan Stikowski, and welcome to an HNC HealthWorks podcast. Today, we welcome registered dietitian Kim Hoban. Thanks for joining us, Kim.
Hi, I'm happy to be here.
So, Kim, you have such a rich background in nutrition and the health field. You're a certified intuitive eating counselor and an NASM certified personal trainer who helps people ditch diets and rebuild their relationships with food and their bodies. And you also wrote a cookbook. So we obviously have a lot to discuss, but what I'm really most interested is starting with your expertise in intuitive eating. And this really isn't a new concept, but it's been gaining attention due to wonderful people like you. So what can you tell us about intuitive eating that maybe we don't already know?
Yeah, so intuitive eating is really an approach to health and wellness that lets go of food rules. There's no dieting, but rather focuses on improving health behaviors. And so it was a framework developed by two registered dietitians, actually, probably almost 20 years ago, and it's changed over time, but there are well over 100 research studies that have been done validating the effectiveness of it, and there are 10 principles behind intuitive eating that emphasize listening to each person's unique body, and what it shows is that intuitive eating is associated with things like improved body image, self-esteem, and actually some health biomarkers like lower triglycerides, higher HDL, the good cholesterol levels, and even more. I can dive into the 10 principles of intuitive eating, but just to kind of give an overview quickly, because it might take up a lot of time to go through each one individually, but basically the 10 principles are to reject a diet mentality, honor your hunger, learn to make peace with food, challenge the food police, which I always like to say, for people that are like dietitians or health coaches, that's often what we're viewed as, is like we're going to, be monitoring and policing what people eat. And so being able to challenge both like the external cues of what people are telling us to do and also our own inner voice. The next principle is to discover the satisfaction factor, which is important to me in particular, and I know we'll get into that in a little bit, probably talking about food and cooking and, enjoying your food. And then we go into feeling fullness, coping with emotions with kindness, which is a really important one for people. A lot of people worry about emotional eating, and actually it's just about kind of developing coping mechanisms outside of just food that can help us deal with all of the emotions and stressors in life. And then the last three are to respect your body, find a difference in movement, so joyful movement rather than punishment and exercise, and then to honor your health through gentle nutrition.
Wow, well, so many of those 10 principles have really struck a chord with me. And the one that makes me really laugh is the one who talks about challenging the food police. And, as a health coach, when before COVID, when I used to visit and hang out with friends, they would always be like, oh, I can't eat that, you're here. And so it's really interesting to be able to, kind of introduce them to this intuitive eating and the different concepts. But, kind of with all of those 10 principles, it sounds like you really put each person in control or really, give them the responsibility of their own habits. So do you ever find that people kind of take advantage of that and use it as an excuse to maybe, not make great food choices?
Sure. I think the biggest thing I see with people starting in intuitive eating is that they think it means, eating whatever you want, whenever you want. There's this misconception that if we trust ourselves to just eat what we want, that means we're only going to be eating pizza and French fries and cookies and ice cream, which, of course, there's room for that. But once we are able to give ourselves unconditional permission to eat all foods while also taking into consideration things like our hunger levels, our fullness, foods being satisfying, and, of course, honoring our emotions, that helps us tune better into our bodies, and we end up eating in a more balanced way. So it kind of sounds counterintuitive, but once you kind of let go of some of those rules and experience some food freedom, we end up respecting our health and well-being a little bit more. And again, it's a challenging thing for people to start implementing. And in the beginning, a lot of times when people are practicing this, yeah, they might have restricted a certain food for a very long time, and then when they reintroduce that food, they do go overboard with it. But eventually, through something called habituation, when we allow it to be in the house and we allow ourselves to eat it and enjoy it, a couple of interesting things happen. Either people find they don't actually really like the food that they've been telling themselves they can't have, or it's just not as satisfying anymore. So it's like, not, I'll have it when I want it, won't when I don't.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like it takes the power out of the good and bad food kind of
Mm-hmm.
mindset. And what about other myths? What other myths can you debunk for us about intuitive eating?
Well, first, I think I want to say that intuitive eating is not intended to be another diet. So we often hear now that intuitive eating is trending and it's competing against some of these other popular diets that are out there, keto or low carb or whatever, intermittent fasting. So it's not intended to be another diet or even like a, quote, lifestyle change. And it's not about focusing just on weight loss. There's no way to fail with intuitive eating. So I like to talk about it as a way that we can bring back some joy to our eating and our experiences with food, while also freeing up all of the time and money and energy that so many of us spend are wasting on dieting and restricting foods for ourselves. Another common misconception is that it's, it's called intuitive eating, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be intuitive or natural or easy for us. So a lot of us think about, when we think about babies, those babies we're all born as intuitive eaters. We kind of know, babies cry when they're hungry. They stop eating when they're full. So we are born with this instinctive ability to trust our hunger and fullness. But then we grow up navigating the dynamics of our family life, our environment, the greater impact of society as a whole, what we see in the media, things like that. So we learn to listen more to those external cues about what and when and where and how we should be eating. And so it takes a little bit of time to start practicing intuitive eating and realizing that we can go back and kind of unlearn some of these external things and get back to more of that, quote, intuitive way of living and eating. And then one other thing I think I would want to mention is that there's often a criticism of intuitive eating or, a myth associated with it that it means that we just ignore nutrition altogether, which, again, as a dietitian myself, you as a health coach, we know nutrition absolutely is important. So this doesn't mean, again, eating whatever you want whenever you want and just pretending like nutritious foods aren't good for us. Like I said, the last of those 10 principles is called gentle nutrition, and it's essentially a way to learn to use food as self-care. So understanding that, perfect eating actually isn't healthy, so you don't have to track every single thing you eat. You don't have to eat specific foods to be healthy, but, kind of honoring where your body's at, and that includes managing certain diseases as well. So things like, people are concerned, can I do intuitive eating with diabetes, or if I have high cholesterol or heart disease, things like that. So I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions about intuitive eating as well.
Yeah, and really to that point, something you mentioned earlier, that there's, this has been around for, 20 years, I think you had said, and there's also studies that show it improves, biometric measures. So I think that, that really goes a long way when people see that there's science behind, this intuitive eating. And what can you tell us about what, intuitive eating looks like? What does kind of a regular day or week look like for somebody?
Sure. Yeah. So truthfully, it looks different for every single person. And I think that that's what's so awesome about it. And I think individualized care is important. So that's what a lot of diets tend to claim that they do, like we customize meal plans or things like that. But really, intuitive eating, because it honors every person's body awareness, their food preferences, things like that, it really allows us to focus on the individual person. So incorporating hunger and fullness cues, challenging some of those inner voices in our heads that say things are good or bad, it allows for a lot of experimenting to learn what foods feel good. And I like to tell people, like, listen to your here and now body. So you may have been for years telling yourself, I always take Brussels sprouts because they're my favorite vegetable, but, you know, for years people are like, ugh, Brussels sprouts. Okay, but maybe you haven't cooked them in a way that actually tastes good or is satisfying. So if we add a little, like, this, again, sounds counterintuitive, we add some butter, we add some bacon to something like Brussels sprouts, they're delicious. So again, you're getting some more nutrition in there, and honoring, you know, your hunger, your fullness, your satisfaction level as well. So there's not one typical day of intuitive eating. And like I said before, I don't think there's any wrong way to do it. So, you know, a lot of times it's like, oh, I ate past my fullness level. And that's okay, because all we're using that as is data for next time. Maybe we recognize that we are eating ice cream and then we tend to feel like groggy or have a sugar high and crash and things like that. So it's kind of tuning in each day and learning about your own body and what works for you individually.
Yeah, it sounds like mindfulness plays a really big role in your counseling and in your practice. Do you spend a lot of time talking about managing stress? And I know just personally, a lot of times, you know, if I'm not careful, when I'm stressed, I tend to eat a little bit more. So what do you see in your practice?
Yes. One of the things, and it's tricky because I think a lot of times dietitians and health coaches and such worry about this boundary of like what's within our scope to discuss. And I think stress levels is one of the most overlooked aspects of our health, especially in a time like now where there's so much added on to our workday, whether you're trying to work from home and you're parenting or homeschooling or just like navigating the stress of the political climate or the you know, health and wellness scares that we have going on. So I think I like to discuss a whole lifestyle, including what tools are people currently using to manage their stress levels. Things like getting enough rest and sleep, having good social support is huge. So yes, mindfulness certainly is a part of intuitive eating, but we need to recognize what impact stress has on our eating choices and then plan for some ways to manage that. So like, you know, if we're getting stressed out every day because it's exhausting cooking dinner, I don't know how you feel, but sometimes I'm like, oh, we have to make dinner again tonight. So having some plans in place of like, how do we plan ahead for the week and build in some convenience foods if that makes life a little bit less stressful and easier, or how do we delegate certain tasks to other family members or ask for help when we need it. So definitely that plays a big role in my counseling.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Let me ask you this. Is it possible to binge on healthy foods?
Yes. So the biggest reason that people tend to binge on foods is actually because they're restricting. And again, that kind of sounds counterintuitive, but if you're not allowing yourself to have certain unhealthy things in your home and you feel like you're limited, you know, you'll often turn to binging on actual like healthy foods that you do have in the home. It's also interesting to like notice what people will label as healthy or unhealthy because it's really so unique and individualized. But when it comes down to it, you know, I tend to think of like nut butter or peanut butter or something as a great food source. It's great. It's got a bunch of great nutrition. It's satisfying. Tons of people love it, you know, of course, if they don't have an allergy. But when it comes down to it, spoonfuls and spoonfuls of peanut butter isn't healthy in the end, especially if it's not satisfying whatever craving you're truly going after. So another example, sometimes I work with people who tend to like really have a sweet tooth or feel like they're craving a sweet treat after dinner or dessert, like an ice cream. And so often they'll reach for that like light or protein ice cream or a healthier version. And what they'll end up doing is eating more of that substitute food than they would if they just enjoyed like a scoop or two of regular full-fat normal ice cream. So absolutely. And it's, again, goes back to kind of what are we restricting and how are we limiting ourselves? And once we ease up on that, we start to realize like binging can decrease, whether it's on, quote, healthy or unhealthy foods.
Yeah, that's really great information to keep in mind. And, no, I know, and it's so obvious that you're passionate about intuitive eating, and you're so passionate, in fact, that you've written your own cookbook. So can you tell us why writing your own cookbook was so important?
Yeah, so I was approached to write a cookbook, and the publisher actually specifically wanted it to be about vegetables. And like I mentioned, I'm a dietitian. I love vegetables, but I don't love the idea of telling people, like, make sure you eat your veggies, because it doesn't really work. So I wanted to make sure that this book was all about celebrating vegetables and how they work for our bodies and what they do for us, rather than just like eating vegetables out of obligation or forcing people to include them in their diet for health reasons. So my cookbook is broken down into 3 parts. The first part focuses on creating an environment where you have the basic kitchen skills and the gear you need to prepare food and vegetables. And then there's a whole section on, I think it's over 30 vegetables, the different profiles about them, on like how do you look for them, how do they store well, how do you prepare each vegetable, and then lastly, it's of course recipes. It's a cookbook, so it's a collection of vegetable-focused recipes, and they ranged from things like soups and appetizers to salads, snacks, even desserts with vegetables in them, which I think is so fun. But again, more of this like delicious, satisfying emphasis on enjoying food versus, restricting or forcing.
Well, that is really great. And Kim, I already have your book, but where can someone go to get your book, or how can they get in touch with you if they really, they want to learn more and they want to connect?
Yeah, thanks for asking. The book is available on Amazon, on Target, at Barnes & Noble. Most major bookstores do have it. It's called How to Cook Vegetables. Very simple. And then more on my work, my counseling and such, my website is khnutrition.com, and I am everywhere on social media as Kim Hoban, RD.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kim, for your time, your expertise, sharing just a little bit about what intuitive eating is, and it's so great to have you. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Megan. It was so great to talk to you.
And thanks to all of our listeners. Please stay tuned for more HNC HealthWorks podcasts.